Welcome back to Quorum One's Future of Work Talk session. Today, I am your host, Trak Lord, partner member at Quorum One. And with me today is our guest and also friend, fellow storyteller, Chikodi Chima. Our goal with these talks is to give us all a chance to dig into the work of one of our members with a particular lens towards the future of work, future of capitalism, future of democratic systems, future of storytelling. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Chikodi Chima, Quorum member, independent PR professional, former journalist, great friend of mine. And Chikodi, it's a pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, Trak, thank you so much for having me. It's really fun to get to be here and have this conversation.
Most certainly. Fun to have you. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, Chikodi?
All right. My background in storytelling is that I was a staff reporter at VentureBeat and West Coast editor for The Next Web. In and around 2012, I started Moonshot, and I work with early stage startup founders building out frontier technologies. Thus far, the companies that I've launched and grown have raised over $1.5 billion from the top VCs and private equity funds globally and in Silicon Valley. You may have heard of Compound, Rapbook, Butler is another one, actually a client of mine that I launched, and they did a $38 million Series B this week. But other fields that I've loved and continue to love are farming and food systems, anything having to do with small businesses, small and medium-sized businesses, and just, anything that's going to really change an industry or has the potential to change the industry and how we live, how we work, how we play. So, was a graduate of the Columbia Journalism School and, been a writer and content person and storyteller for my entire life. So I'm excited to get to talk about what's relevant in the startup ecosystem broadly, what's happening in tech media and media business models and the power of narrative.
Fantastic. So, Chikodi, you have had the pleasure of being a tech journalist during really like the first big prominence when tech started to become mainstream, working for some of the institutions of tech media like VentureBeat, Next Web, publications that are still around today, and then making the jump into, you had mentioned Moonshot. Moonshot is your boutique PR.
That's right. Moonshotpr.com. Check us out.
We'll make sure it's in the show notes for sure.
Thank you.
So going to Moonshot, where you now, the relationship has that dynamic that's changed, right? Because you used to be the journalist that a lot of these companies were coming to in order to publicize, and now you're working for them, doing that other. So yeah, what was that shift, that perspective shift like?
Yeah, the being a tech journalist in San Francisco, everyone wants to get on your dance card, and I have had incredible experiences where, just on a Tuesday or Wednesday night, a startup has rented out a giant nightclub and they have dancers twirling from the ceiling and people carrying around cocktail platters full of shrimp and hors d'oeuvres and open bar, and then Girl Talk, the DJ, flies in to do a 45-minute set, probably at a cost of, for one night, they probably spent $500,000 or $750,000 so easily. And these are things you don't even hear about if you're just a regular person, but because you're sitting in that seat as a tech reporter, people want you to be there. They're dying for you to be there. So that's one of the perspectives that I come from. And then the other side of it is that, what story are you telling with this? And back in the day, the story was one of lavish excess, and we have so much money, the money is never going to dry up. And, when you're actually representing the business, you have to tell a very different story. You have to be able to reach customers. You have to be able to grow an audience. You have to show ROI. And so that's a definite perspective shift. But I'm super grateful to have gotten to experience things like that. Actually, my editor at VentureBeat at the time said, the party's over when they start bringing ice sculptures to events. So there was no ice sculpture at this particular event with Girl Talk, but it was definitely a high water moment I would say.
Yeah, the ice sculpture thing. When you said ice sculpture and this idea of excess in tech startups and early stage companies, I immediately thought to every single event I ever went to at 25 Lust. I imagine that place stayed in business for a long time, simply backed not directly but indirectly by VC funding.
Right. Because it was there in the middle of Soma. Yeah, so definitely the story of technology, maybe we'll get to this, but back in those early days, just getting a feature story in VentureBeat or TechCrunch or one of these publications was enough to propel you and get funding and get inbound from quality investors, get customers, and people would line up to want to work with you. And that is, in certain instances that can still manifest, but the primacy, if you will, of the tech media has shifted a lot. And one of the areas where that shifted is Product Hunt. And if people are unfamiliar with Product Hunt listening to this, definitely check it out at producthunt.com. But it's a leaderboard for new startups and new apps and services, and people upvote and comment all day. And then the top startup of the day, or the top few startups of the day, gets sent out in an email to millions of Product Hunt users. So that's a new platform that has, in a lot of ways, taken the place of the traditional tech media with journalists and editors and gatekeepers. So the power of gatekeepers has shifted, but at the same time, tech media still has a lot of imprimatur. Tech media still has a role to play.
I think the Product Hunt example is a fantastic example. I remember when Ryan Hoover was first, sort of trying to get that out there, and essentially over time, it sort of aligns with the way that we also live, work, and communicate. Like this sort of more interest and success of forums or more community-centric types of dispensing information. Reddit, of course, huge. You have all of these communities building up sort of independently, Slack or Discord. And the Product Hunt thing, it makes a lot of sense. And I think some of the most successful examples I've seen in Product Hunt are when the founders or the engineers or whomever it is actively engaging with all of the people that are in the comments. And that's something, it seems silly to say potentially, but that's something you cannot do with a press release or an article. It's a very static form of communication or engagement, right? You can tweet it, you can share it out. You can exit. I don't know what I feel old every time I have to talk about Twitter or X, but yeah, it makes so much sense that it's almost behind its time in the sense that it took us so long to realize that this would be a more satisfying user experience, right? This would be a more successful way of engagement because you actually have people doing it.
Yeah.
But yeah, you and I have been in tech PR more or less. Like I think you've got a few years on me, and of course you spent longer than I did as a journalist. But I don't know, when I'm headline surfing, when I'm, for whatever reason, going to the front page of a tech media website, which almost never happens anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Why are early stage startups so bad at PR?
There's a number of reasons why early stage startups are bad at PR. They've spent a lot of time and energy and effort to build a thing, and they're excited about the thing that they've built. And they want to share their excitement about the thing that they've built, and they forget to talk about the user experience. Why is it going to make an impact for them? Why is this product going to change how they live, how they work, how they play? And that's what they care about. They don't care about you. They don't care about the product. They care about themselves. And if the product delivers on the need that they have or desire, that's what they want to know about. It's very easy to forget that. There's an expression I love, which is that you can't read the label when you're inside the bottle. So being so close to something is one of the chief storytelling sins. Another thing that makes startups really bad at PR and storytelling is they're really focused on what their competitor is doing now. And I talk about that a lot when I work with startups, is that the competitor you have today is going to look nothing like you and nothing like itself in 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 5 years. So don't waste your ammo going after someone that's at a relatively similar size to you or doesn't have market domination. Go after either a phenomenon that will still be there and will still be a problem in 10 years or 20 years, or go after a behemoth like Microsoft and Oracle, Google. That gives you a lot of credibility. So those are two areas where startups are really bad at storytelling. And then also, less something that you can really point a finger at anyone for doing this intentionally. But if you're very technical, then you're used to tech. You're used to either, science, math, engineering, the STEM disciplines. And so switching over to the liberal arts can be a challenge because you're talking to humans and you're talking to people that aren't experts in the things that you're an expert in. And so you need to be able to change. You need to be able to translate that expertise into something that is relatable, something people can get their arms around. And so if you're surrounded by other technical people, you don't have that feedback loop, you don't have practice in it, of course you're going to suck at it. And that's just the opening move, right? And once you realize you suck, then you can get better at it. That's having the humility to be like, hey, I suck at this and I want to learn and I want to get better. That's a person who's going to succeed. So I love working with those types of people where they recognize their own limitations. I think that's a hugely powerful unlock, is that I want to get better at this, and you will get better at it if you recognize that you can, and if you're ready to take that step.
I think that's a wonderful point. You've got me all nostalgic thinking about the early teens and the sort of halcyon days of just an explosion of startups and different technologies, and also right around the time that social media was coming up, and you've had all of these founders, either pre-successful or post-successful, that were just sort of flooding the various channels and communities with content, advice. And it reminded me of just one of the silliest things that I remember from this time, which was a founder or burgeoning entrepreneur who decided that he wasn't going to take no for an answer. His hypothesis was that he was too afraid of failure. And in order to solve this or fix it, he decided he was going to spend a week not accepting no as an answer. This is around 2011, well before the Me Too movement, by the way. Not unrelated, I suppose. But and he posted a video of it, and he was walking around, and it's no surprise to me that this kind of cultural foundation led to lack of ability to admit that you're not good at something. We've sort of built up this idea of foundational entrepreneurialism as a virtue in and of itself, rather than the fact that we are still people, we are still fallible, which is also crazy because a lot of that software explosion was built on the spirit of iteration, of trying things, failing. But for some reason, when you make that code switch from code to storytelling or something that's not software engineering related, that spirit of iteration just quickly disappears.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of culprits there, right? And as I said, a couple minutes ago, is that the liberal arts is still really important because you need to be able to meet people where they're at. If they care about sports, if they care about Arsenal Football Club, talk to them about that, and then circle back to how your product can impact something that people like and care about. And so we know it's always good to be well-rounded. So the more well-rounded you are as an entrepreneur, the better you are as a storyteller, because you can interpret data, you can interpret body language, you can, there's all these cues that are out there that you can then use to tell a good story. And people being specialists, hyper specialists, it's a tough thing because in the Valley, people are really, if you ever looked for a job online, They're looking for, one in 10,000 people who can do this very specific thing and came from a similar sized company in a similar stage doing a similar role. And the fact is, as humans, we have curves and edges and corners, and so those don't fit smoothly into slots. And as a CEO, especially being nuanced, having a wide range of skills is going to serve you well. So there's a selection bias, because as a startup founder, as an entrepreneur, you need to have that discipline. You need to have that win-ativity, that go out and get it attitude. But then you also need to be adaptable. You need to be emotionally resilient, because you're going to have a lot of really hard days and triumphs and tragedies, and often multiple triumphs and tragedies in the same day. A person who is self-selected to be an entrepreneur needs to be able to block all that stuff out, keep focused, keep executing, but then also be a human. So, there is definitely a paradox there, is that the types of people that are selected for entrepreneurship aren't always selected for their storytelling prowess, but the ones that are able to tell better stories succeed. And sometimes they're not even as capable of builders, but they are much more capable, much more relatable when it comes to telling a story. And those are often the most successful startup founders, most successful entrepreneurs in history, the ones we talk about today, even after their passing. Steve Jobs. Yeah, exactly. He was an amazing storyteller, and there's so much to learn from him as a storyteller. And as an entrepreneur, as a leader, as a teammate, as a human, there's also things to learn, but it's not the positive lessons. You're not necessarily wanting to emulate. And the more people learn about him as an individual, the less shine his legacy has. But nobody will ever doubt him as a storyteller. Just watch him, and he just oozes charisma. And actually, I want to, if I can take us on a slight detour here. So I was having a conversation last night about Riz, and I don't know if it was you or who, but Riz comes from charisma. Mm-hmm. There's this idea of rizzing, and I would like to see more startup founders have Riz, because it's not just having charisma. There's the whole way of being around Riz. It's a way to go through life. And it's so important to have Riz as a startup founder, because you need to get people excited. You need to meet them where they're at. You need to also be memorable. And that's one of the things that I really strongly emphasize in my communications practice is you need to be so good at telling a story that my mother, my aunt can tell a person in line at the grocery store what I do and why it's important. And when you have that powerful word of mouth, that's when you're going to really succeed. And if you can get people electrified, if you can really rizz them up, then, you can walk into any room, find a customer, find a recruit, get an investor that wants to take a meeting with you. And so that has very little, if anything, to do with your product, your service, your team, your technology, and everything to do with your story and your ability to live that story. And so this idea of Riz is, I think, a technological breakthrough and a linguistic breakthrough, because, having charisma, being flirtatious, being fun, all of that is those are timeless qualities. But then this idea of having Riz and bringing Riz to the party is something that only exists because of the language, but it's also something that you can think about. It's okay, well, you can cultivate Riz. There's a time before you had Riz, and then a time after. But it's we're talking about shifts, and so sometimes the introduction of a term into language denotes a shift. And so I would say that the introduction of Riz into the lexicon, and the fact that people use Riz and talk about Riz, is where we are today, and I think where startup founders need to be putting some of their energy. And startup founder, with Riz will win. That's
Yes. Yeah.
you know.
Historically accurate. I would say, I don't know if I've ever met a startup founder who didn't have Riz that didn't wish they did have Riz. Even before that word was even introduced, there was a lot of, what do you call it, jealousy, at least back in the 2010, 2020 time period, where you had these kind of brand startup founders. Aaron Levie is probably one of the, Aaron Levie for that era, at least in my opinion, had no, like, an endless amount of risk. Just a young guy in a very unsexy space, or was considered unsexy at that
From
time.
Box.
Exactly, from
Yeah.
Box.com, as it were, who was wearing Jordans with his suits, and I remember one of my old managers, director of communications at Twilio, said Aaron would open a grocery store if he knew there was going to be press there, right? He took every opportunity. He truly embodied and became the face of that company. Whereas in a lot of, whether they were peers or similarly minded SaaS companies, you didn't have that same sort of, embodiment, that same sort of CEO brand representing them. Yeah. So I always look at that as a very, very good example of, how Box has done it in years since, I think is less relevant to, I do believe that their initial success was inextricable from energy and risk.
Absolutely. It's funny because we're both in San Francisco, and I went to Mint Karaoke, and this was, I don't know if Box had IPO'd, but certainly, Box was a near-peer competitor with Dropbox at that time. And a small contingent of the Dropbox team was there, including Drew Houston, who was the CEO of Dropbox. And he got on the mic, and I think he did like an Elton John karaoke or something. It was just like, swoon. He was incredible as a singer, and, his whole team was there, but that wasn't necessarily part of his corporate persona. And so there are different reasons why you might want to be more buttoned up, and reasons why you want to be out there and flashy and be known for having Jordans on. But I mean, Box is one of my favorite startup storytelling references of all time. I love talking about the things that Box did. And, again, I said a few minutes ago about, you don't want to be shooting all your arrows at Dropbox if you're Box, because you guys are both little pipsqueaks when it comes to Microsoft. But what Box did, which was really good, is that they would buy billboards on the 101, which is there's the 101 and the 280 in San Francisco, but the 101 goes to SFO and goes to San Jose and,
Sand Hill Road.
Yeah, Sand Hill Road. And they would buy billboards on the 101 to say, hey, Microsoft, thanks for all the customers, and they would really go after Microsoft. And Box is, when it IPO, I don't know what it is today. It's probably okay, but it was a minor $3 billion company. And when you're talking about tech, Microsoft has committed over $10 billion to invest in OpenAI. And, if you're a company that's a third of what Microsoft is investing in OpenAI, that's not big in absolute terms at all. But if they were spending all of their time going after Dropbox, then, no one probably would have ever heard them, and no one would care. And think about all of the storage companies that were around at the time. Mega Upload, Share Through. There were a lot. It was a crowded, undifferentiated space at the time, and they did the smart thing, as history will prove, by going after Microsoft, and it made them look much, much bigger and much more formidable and important by positioning themselves against the industry giant.
Yeah, one of my favorite things, it sounds like you give this advice too to your clients when talking about competitors, is not only the counsel that you gave earlier in our conversation, but also, why not, instead of go after competitors, why don't create a peer? right? Create
Mm-hmm.
a peer that already exists, that's already established, and continually insert yourself at the same level as conversations about that. And I think Box did that expertly in
Mm-hmm.
essentially equating themselves with Microsoft, despite the fact that they were nowhere near close in terms of market share, funding, resources. But for a while, they successfully made it to the conversations where, oh, storage, like Box or Microsoft. And that's sort of, eventually, I don't know, Dropbox is still around, of course, but I imagine that they nowhere near captured the enterprise market the way that Box was able to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, so I feel like we could talk about the rise of SaaS companies and tech journalism for hours, but I
Mm-hmm.
want to get to a couple questions
Yeah.
from the audience. One thing I did want to mention is like we do have Arsenal fans in the chat, so that's
Fantastic.
nice.
Okay.
Yeah, so you dressed accordingly. For those listening to the podcast, Chikodi is wearing an Arsenal jersey. So we had, I think this came from your mention of the agricultural tech
Mm-hmm.
and the food systems. So we get some questions about psychedelics.
All right.
I think the
Fantastic.
I
If you're a psychedelic startup and you're looking for PR, I've been wanting to have a psychedelic client for some years now. So this is, yeah,
psychedelics industry client, right?
psychedelics industry client. Yes.
Yeah, not just a psychedelic client. I'm sure you can
Mhm.
find a number of those in
Oh,
the
yeah.
news.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Mhm.
So a few comments about that. I think it's also relevant because we were talking about the startup persona, the startup founder persona, and the sort of tweaks and changes that you make to your personality in order to
Have riz.
overcome a lot of those challenges. I think ego death is probably a helpful one.
Mhm.
So let's start talking about some psychedelics.
Okay.
So it seems that we have a lot of believers in psychedelics, and I'd say, what's your sort of take? Because you, if I recall correctly, you had been talking to some industries or mental health awareness type clients. So like, what are you seeing right now in the world of media and communication and psychedelics?
Mm. Yeah. So I have a really good friend, and we were out, we had a couple beers, and he was telling me that and I'm not super knowledgeable here, so
Sure, paraphrasing.
about this specific instance, but I guess they were going to change the scheduling of MDMA and maybe psilocybin, and for some reason the clinical trials that were being run were the data came out poorly, and so it set it back by a year at least.
An InBev executive just walked into the lab and dumped a Bud Light onto it or
Yeah,
something.
right.
Yeah.
So that's what I heard, and again, not my specific. Okay, so someone in the chat is saying just one clinical trial by one company and only MDMA, but not psilocybin. So if if that is the fact of the matter, I will defer to them. But the thing about psychedelics is there's a several companies that are using ketamine, and ketamine assisted psychotherapy is something that has a bit of a history now. There's a company called Mind Bloom. There are several others, but the way that they were able to grow is that they could use, I think, emergency authorization during the pandemic to prescribe people over video. And, there's general use. I believe that women can be treated, can receive ketamine during labor for pain relief when giving birth. So, just generally, you can prescribe ketamine for whatever ails you, but it does have a lot of mental health benefits in patients that are using it. And so the recognition that there are alternative modes of treating mental health, and just the intense weight of modern life and the need for alternative remedies is a reason why psychedelics are very, very popular and showing a lot of promise. So
I think it's wild based on scheduling because right around, I want to say 2021, 2020, and again, I think people in the chat can probably correct me on this. Ketamine was up along with psilocybin, LSD, I think a couple other psychedelics. and for some sort of schedule change like decriminalization. And at the last minute, ketamine got removed, at least from the San Francisco, state of California or San Francisco city discussions, because of the incorrect associations of ketamine as a date rape drug. And I love the cognitive dissonance of saying that a substance is a substance used for sexual assault when you are also giving it to a pregnant woman to, like, during labor, to help with pain relief, right? Like that just seems ketamine has long been used in invasive surgery, in combinations with anesthesiology, and it just sort of it's wild to me.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's also, staying on the overarching topic of is narrative, right?
Yeah.
So, California legalized marijuana for recreational use. Anyone can get it with an ID that says they're over 21. Life has not changed here. A volcano did not, surface in the middle of the bay and start spewing lava, and all of a sudden, our kids are drug-addled zombies, right? In every state that I've been to where they have recreational marijuana, it's just like, oh yeah, there's a Chinese restaurant over here, there's an Ethiopian restaurant across the street, and there's a weed dispensary, and it's just like, oh, but there's so much of this, what's it, I'm blanking on the name, but
Reefer
just
madness.
Yeah, reefer madness, exactly. The reefer madness was so powerful, and it's like if you really look at what's gonna harm kids is vaping, like popcorn lung and stuff like that. Like there's always something to be up in arms about. It could be TikTok, it could be vaping, it could be what have you, but there's a lot of reasons why you don't really need to be worried about cannabis, marijuana. It's like, first of all, if you're going to go buy it at a dispensary, it's expensive. There's a lot of taxes. They're very security conscious. You got to show your ID. There's a guy with a gun at the door a lot of the times. It's highly, highly, highly regulated. So the fact that you can get it in a lot of places doesn't make it any more desirable. And the fact you can grow it doesn't make it any more desirable either. It's like, I can brew beer in my kitchen. Some people do like to brew beer, but the vast, overwhelming majority of people, if they want to get a beer, they go to the bar, they go to the grocery store. And it's the same thing with weed, right? So, but that stigma, that association, that narrative around marijuana that created reefer madness, it's like one of the earliest things, because I actually have a lot of history in the weed industry, but calling it cannabis instead of weed, marijuana, dope, like that was a shift, and it gave it more of a sophistication, more of a, curiosity, right? It's cannabis. It's
We gentrified
same
marijuana.
thing. Yeah, gentrified, exactly. It's exactly the same thing, but because the narrative changed, and so with psychedelics, the narrative needs to shift. And one of the powerful things, I think, one of the powerful tools in narrative around psychedelics is veterans' mental health and PTSD. And, that's in the vanguard, or was in the vanguard. But, the more conversations people have about their mental health and the benefits that they are experiencing from microdosing, that's something that a lot of, it's an interesting thing to be in the Bay Area, because the whole microdosing thing, that's 8-10 years on now, where people will take a small amount of LSD every day, go to work, and it makes them a little more creative, a little happier. And it's like, I mean, especially if you're riding the bus to work and your company's paying for your transportation, it's like, well, yeah, like even if there's the risk of, impairment, if you're riding the bus to work, or you're taking public transportation, then there's no risk of you being behind the wheel of a car. But, startup CEOs, founders, tech workers started microdosing. There's a lot of stories about that. And then it spreads, and then you start to have moms microdosing and then going to their soccer practice to pick up the kids, or ballet, or whatever activities, and it becomes more commonplace. And so it's there is no stigma. And again, if you're getting benefits from it, and the benefits last a long time, then we could talk about story wars too, where if you're a pharmaceutical company and you want to keep selling an opioid or something like that, then you're not going to want an alternative out there. But so it's like, who has the money to tell a story? Who has the audience? Who has the solution?
In fact, earlier when we were talking about what the most dangerous, for clarity, both Chikodi and I are fathers of children who are similarly aged. I was thinking the most dangerous thing for children is not necessarily the substance, but these intellectually dishonest and powerful narratives that are based on ulterior motives rather than rooted in any kind of fact. Just like the reefer madness, or it's another good example of a just patently false thing that continues to haunt all of our minds. I might think of one later, but
YouTube. I mean, like I am guilty of letting my son watch more YouTube than I would like. I'm a single parent, so I'm not going to flog myself to death over that. But I let my son have my phone. I remember we were driving back from the airport. He took my phone. Anyway, he had my phone. He was recording a video of himself, and he said, "Hey guys, like and subscribe." That is so ingrained in him from the amount of time he spends on YouTube that he doesn't even know what it means. He can't subscribe to any channels because of the user settings I have on his account. But he's like, "How do I subscribe? How do I like and subscribe?" So it's just it's really insidious, because for my son right now is 7, and it's not only him. Like, I'm 43, and they're always hawking products on every video, whether they're hawking their own subscription or a Patreon, which I have less of a problem with. It's like, hey, get Aura or Cogito, whatever it is. But that directed at a 7-year-old who's so impressionable, just mainlining consumerism into young kids. I think that's way more dangerous than some of the other things we've talked about.
For sure. Just catching up on some of the commentary in the audience. A lot of fascinating stuff there in the chat. I did want to address one of the audience questions from one of the first ones, and I think it goes very well for this question of mental health and technology and biochemical technology around mental health. So for services that are essentially providing the framework for people who are looking to improve their mental health, like access to psychedelics or ketamine, or looking for microdosing schedules. The question was kind of around, when you're not a product, when you're more of a service, right? Like, what is the storytelling around that? Because this person specifically said, like, in the mental health world, I don't want calling my patients or the people that I'm serving users feels right, because you don't, if you're a ketamine or psychedelic or LSD microdosing thing, you probably don't want to be referring to your customers or your the people that you're servicing as users, right? So
right,
or you want to be talking about product, because again, these power of these words and their associations. So how do you see that, and have you seen any kind of good case studies out there?
Yeah, well, calling people patients might be legally in jeopardy, because you don't have a medical relationship unless you're actually a doctor. You might call them clients, and you might call them community. So there are different things, I think, that would fit the description of someone that's getting a benefit. You wouldn't call them beneficiaries, but and I see in the chat, seekers is a term. So seekers is I find that an interesting use of the word, and there's an interesting phrase. And everyone might not think of themselves as a seeker, but if it's working, then great. I guess it's just a matter of experimentation, and again, when it comes to like, I'm thinking of dietary supplements. Anything can be a dietary supplement. You can't call it
illegally.
Yeah. And you can't say that it's going to improve your health, right? The minute you use the word health, then you're talking about a medical outcome. But if you say performance, if you say, energy, there's a lot of words that are not health that are the same thing. And I want to, this is totally random, but I think it'll make sense. So, we just got past the Summer Olympics, and I didn't watch the Summer Olympics except for a couple of minutes of track and field and some swimming, but I didn't seek it out. The Chinese swimmers were tarred and feathered over a doping allegation, and it turned out that they stayed in a hotel where a trace amount of heart medicine was detected on a vent hood in the kitchen. And so this heart medication that was a banned substance ended up in the food they ate. They tested them the night before. They were clean. They tested them the next morning, and they had this trace amount of this medication. But the same chemical is in other medications that are not banned. And there's no threshold amount for how much this chemical can if you have one part per billion of this chemical, then you are failing the test, right?
Hey, quick question.
Yeah.
How did this chemical happen to find itself on the hood of a food preparing machine?
That I don't know.
I mean, I have some thoughts. I won't say them here, but it seems pretty convenient when, the only superpower to rival the West stays in a hotel where a substance that, if detected at 1 part per billion, appears in your bloodstream, you're disqualified from your athletic achievement on international television. I don't know. I'm just asking questions.
Oh, the thing is, it's not an uncommon or even illegal. It's not an illegal substance. It's a substance that is in multiple other drugs, and there's no performance benefit for it. It's just a banned substance. So, yeah. But
well, I feel like we could talk for a very long time about the slip-ups and trip-ups narrative-wise about these Summer Olympics. Unfortunately, feels like that night is dark and full of terrors. So let's see.
Thanks to everyone who's participating in the chat. Keep the questions coming. Glad that you're connecting with each other and getting value out of this conversation. Or hope you're getting value out of this conversation. But I see that there's a lot of activity there.
Yeah. Let's see. And then I kind of wanted to hear what's something that you're seeing out there. Oh, actually, sorry. Let me back that up. I wanted to talk about the future of work, because we're here.
Yeah.
So what do you think in terms of storytelling, in terms of distributed, lack of in-person office, less companies, more companies? What is sort of the future of storytelling?
Yeah. Well, so there's a couple parts to the answer. The future of work for people who do not have W-2 stable employment is that you're going to be working really closely with AI, and you're going to need to develop a specialization with what you've been doing and what you have a history of, and enhance it with AI, scale it up, systematize it, because everyone is going to be very hyper specialized in a thing. There continues to be massive job loss, permanent job loss in tech. So we still got to deliver value somehow. But it can be really fun. It can be interesting. And you can do a lot less of the things you hate to do and a lot more of the thing that really lights you up. And people will still pay you for it, and people still grow. So that's a little bit of my thought about the future of work. And then, one of the things that I'm really excited about, and, we were talking about these opulent, just decadent parties with Girl Talk as the DJ and ice sculptures and all that. It's like, I really think there's going to be a return. And I think I'm seeing a return to event-based marketing, community building, and networking. It's like if AI can sound like the best copywriters in history and write your email newsletter for you, give you topics for LinkedIn posts, like nothing is going to take the place of me close enough to smell your cologne. Maybe you spill a drink on me, but it's like those are the actual relationships that are going to matter even more. So if you are in a position to grow a community, to build a community, to really strengthen a community of people in the real world, that is huge. And that's going to set you apart from somebody who's equally capable, but moved, 2 hours outside of Atlanta during the pandemic and bought a house and moved their family there for valid reasons. But, if you can connect to people in person, I mean, that was one of the fun things about these lavish parties is, you meet people, but you still meet people in person. And that's the power of community, and that's the power of proximity. And a really good friend of mine who's in Atlanta right now, but moved from Brazil to Miami and then Atlanta, said, "What's the value of living in San Francisco?" And I said, serendipity is priceless. You never know if you're talking about something that someone has an interest in and they overhear you and you're in line in the coffee shop or you're at the bar or something, like, and they hear it and like, "Oh, well, I'm working on that right now. I just raised $5 million. I exited my last company and I just raised money to do that. Do you want to talk about this more?" It's like that accidental meeting is why you should move to San Francisco. Tourist plug. But, being in a hub is a priceless, there's obviously pros and cons, but serendipity is life-changing. And you can find it online. You can certainly find that serendipity on Product Hunt if you're really engaged. But, Trak and I, we were circling each other because our kids went to school together for a year. And then at one point it's like, "Oh, you do tech PR? I do tech PR." And so it's like, now we're very good friends as a result of it. But it was only because we had that. It wasn't even because our kids went to school together and played soccer together at the same time. It was that we found out that we have the same, professional background. And I wouldn't even know about you if I didn't live in the city. So
Yeah, if you lived, down some road in some suburb somewhere, right? And I think that you bring up a very good point, is that the value in living in San Francisco, or honestly any kind of extensive and diverse city, is you get more dice rolls, right? You get more opportunities. You increase, it's the basic fundamentals of probability and outcomes, right? The more chances you have, the more likely you are to succeed. And I think we overlook that aspect of living in a city. I will say also, it makes total sense that we're going back to these in-person type of, not that we're going back to them, but that they're close to becoming as important and critical to sort of success in networking and tech and hiring as they originally were, because we all got shut in for 2.5 years. And of course you have that. And then, the fact that AI can basically pretend to be me and give you a call and have essentially an entire conversation without you ever knowing, because at least according to Paul Graham, my vocabulary consists mostly of words that are prominently used AI by LLMs. That was an insight.
Until you hear delve, and then you know that
delve, I can remember bifurcates. I'm like, there's no one use these words anymore. Come on.
Right.
Can't be that bad.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I suppose there was sort of a follow-up to that as well in the audience about, Web3 playing a role in storytelling. I think, and we'll probably wrap this up shortly after this, but one of the things that it always impressed me about you, or I found impressive, is that during the early days of ChatGPT, you immediately started integrating it into your consulting and client work. And I think that is something that especially writers have a hard time with, because it's weird. I don't know. Do you think, like, among writers and among storytellers, that there's this kind of reluctance or the sort of indignance of things like ChatGPT?
So that is a road I could go down for a long time. But the thing is that, like, you're not hiring me because I'm a writer. You're hiring me to solve a problem. If I'm using a tool, like, you're like, I'm going to hire you, but I don't want you to use a keyboard. I want you to only write by hand. I want you to use a pencil, not a pen. That just sounds ridiculous, right? So the idea of, like, not wanting to leverage the tools that are available is silly to me. And then if you're a really seasoned copywriter and you have 25 years, you and I both have 25 years plus of, hard-earned lessons and work. And so it's like, when you pair that with an not all-knowing AI, but, a very dexterous large language model, it's like, well, I know what BS is, and I know what good stuff is, and being able to tweak something that's 85% good right off the bat that's a real skill, and I can only do that because I've spent 25 years plus of my life working on writing and storytelling. And, there's emotion, there's nuance, there's subtlety that a computer is never going to get. But the combination of the two creates a lot of possibilities. And then you combine that with, like, if I can spend a much smaller fraction of my time on the writing work and I can spend more time in person building relationships, then ultimately that's a win-win for everybody. So
Very well said.
and it's a good filtering mechanism. I don't remember. I think it was he's very, very prolific on LinkedIn, and he works with Laura Costa and Jasmine Elise and this other guy. But he said it's a good filtering mechanism because clients that have an aversion, clients that don't want him to be working with AI, it's like, oh, well, those aren't good clients for me. So if you're proactively saying, like, I'm working with AI on your benefit, for your benefit, and people are open to it, then those are good clients. So that's kind of where I see it today. And I think people that aren't willing to use it or are scared, it's like, you better learn because it's not going anywhere. That's what I feel about that.
Cool. Yeah, well said. I have to agree, given that just the most confounding thing I think I've seen regarding that whole AI and don't use it was a very prominent AI company that I will not name, really stated in their application to write a 500-word essay, and that you were not allowed to use LLMs in order to direct it, which is mind-boggling. But
Yeah.
so, as
Smattering irony.
what is it? Satire's dead. Yeah. So, a couple things. One, since we're wrapping this up, as every time I talk to someone on the future of work, I like to give them an opportunity to plug something. We already talked about moonshotpr.com. Is there anything that you've been working on lately, or maybe a book that you've read that you want to recommend? It's up to you.
Yeah. So Nick Gray wrote a book called The 2-Hour Cocktail Party, and I am having a cocktail party on Wednesday. If you reach out to me on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/in/Chikodi, send me a direct message and I will send you an invite to the party, as long as you're not a Man City fan. But
Tough.
Yeah. But yeah, so I'm going to be having an event at my house, and I'd love for you, if you are accessible and you got this far in the podcast, to come to that. And then the book is called The 2-Hour Cocktail Party, so I'm putting that into play. So those are my plugs, basically. And I do think Arsenal will win the league, and I'm excited for it. I'm here for it. But I will be up at 4:30 in the morning tomorrow to watch the game live. That's my level of commitment. But I think everyone should be, if you're here and you want to grow your business, like have an event, get belly button to belly button with people and make things happen.
Great. For those of you listening to this in a recorded fashion, the date of recording right now is Friday, August 30th. So if it's significantly beyond that date, feel free to reach out to Chikodi, but note that the Wednesday in reference has already.
But there may be an upcoming Wednesday event when you do reach out. And I would love for you to reach out.
There you go.
Yeah.
2-hour cocktail party. Someone has been reading my diary. And with that, thank you all to the audience, to the participants. Thank you, Chikodi, taking the time out of your schedule to come talk to me. And as always, and we do these fairly regularly, you can find previous sessions and on our podcast, Quorum One podcast, which you can find anywhere podcasts are available. Our YouTube, our Twitter/X, and our LinkedIn profile, all of which should be relatively accessible to anyone listening to this. Thanks again, and hope everyone has a wonderful day.
This was super fun. Thank you for having me.